Sihle, and we turn our attention now to some of the stories that have made headlines this week. Second day of former Bosasa COO Angelo Agrizzi's testimony at the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture. It had to be adjourned after some security concerns were raised yesterday. And this, of course, following Agrizzi's concern at the presence of a former police officer, Solomon Segale, who used to work for Bosasa at the Commission. And then there was, of course, the DA billboard that didn't enjoy its stay when it was defaced just after it was unveiled, and also the billboard which published names of the Life Esidimeni and Marikana victims was damaged by people believed to be family members of some of those victims whose names appeared on it. So to help us unpack some of these developments, we joined now from our Pretoria studios by Professor Kealeboga Maphunye from UNISA's Department of Political Science. Professor, good morning and thanks for speaking to us.
Good morning, Sakina, and good morning to the viewers, and good morning as well to Leanne. Thank you for inviting me.
Professor, let's start with the state capture of inquiry, because that is the big one, especially the surprise testimony of Angelo Agrizzi this week. Now, first and foremost, we did not expect to see him testify on Wednesday, but of course, that's how the commission resumed. What did you make of that, and also the revelations that he has made thus far?
Well, South Africans yesterday woke up to the revelations, or further revelations, one should say, of the Zondo Commission, startling, one should say, of the stuff that Angelo Agrizzi was mentioning, spilling the beans, as it were. And what came to my mind was issues around the legislation, the Public Finance Management Act. Because this is the stuff that is covered by the Public Finance Management Act and a whole battery of rules and regulations, treasury regulations, public finance rules that mean that you cannot have a situation where the stuff that he was talking about basically border on criminality, the stuff that the legislation intended to avoid or to deal with in the first place. So that was my first take. However, the other issue was the fact that South Africa has to learn from many African countries, which after the independence, political independence, descended into virtually, a situation of corruption type of societies. And this unfortunately makes it very, very difficult for people to say the rule of law in South Africa is quite, tight, or is quite likely to ensure that the country, the country status is seen in a good light by many people who believe that South Africa is much better than those African countries. So in short, that was my initial impression. However, it means that what needs to be done is that the people that are looking at prosecution, especially the NPA, the National Prosecution Authority, as well as other state bodies, for instance, the Public Service Commission and so on, they must be closely looking at what is coming out of the Zondo Commission, especially what came out yesterday and what we expect will likely come out today.
Professor Maphunye, I want to dig deeper into these lessons you say we ought to be learning from other African states. What are those lessons, number one? Number two, are we in a position to actually implement whatever lessons we could, should, or may have learned? And also, have we as a society perhaps become desensitized to corruption and its implications, given the reaction that we've seen to these revelations up to this point? It has been rather muted.
Well, let me start with the last one. Are we desensitized to corruption? There are clear signs from my side that in the past 10 years, we probably might have been desensitized to corruption. Precisely when we don't deal with, corruption or corruption allegations as and when they arrive, and make sure that you know, there's prosecution at the end of the day. It's all very well that you know, the media and us political commentators and other people will, you know, expose these corruption allegations. But at the end of the day, for me, is what happens to once they have been exposed. And this is where now the prosecution agencies come in to ensure that the rule of law is maintained by making sure that people do account. In other words, the so-called consequence management that is now normally bandied about. We have to make sure that those who are accused of you know, issues, criminal activities, as has been the case in the past 10 years or so, you know, are brought to book. So for me, that is the main issue. However, you know, what are these lessons that I was talking about? The very first lesson is that the relationship of political office bearers, elected as it were, even those who are unelected, with the people who are in charge of public finances, have got to be transparent, but they also have to be subjected to the rule of law. In other words, we do not have to have a situation where scandals erupt, whereby there are monies exchanging hands, brown envelopes and so on, as would seem to be the case in this, you know, in these allegations that Agrizzi was, you know, painting for us. And then at the end of the day, we end up not having any actions being taken. So for me, the key lesson is to ensure that whatever allegations one is facing, especially public representatives, at the end of the day, they must face the full wrath of the law. That is the first lesson. The second lesson is to ensure that, especially when we are now a bit about 4 or so months away from a major election, national and provincial elections, that some of these scandals that are erupting, like this one, which seems to be a scandal in the making, should not just be merely seen as a, you know, a political football in the run-up to an election, campaign fodder as it were. However, they should be pursued even after an election, because I know, Sakina, quite likely what is going to happen from now on after these Zondo Commission you know, revelations. We are going to see many political parties and actors jostling for political mileage, gaining political mileage out of such scandals. And then immediately after the election, the noise is going to die down, and then it's going to be business as usual. So for me, those are the two lessons that we need to learn from the other African countries, that if you leave them, then we are going to descend into what others have called, you know, banana republic status or near banana republic status.
But isn't this just a gradual decline, a gradual slip down that slope for us as South Africans? Because what we are hearing a lot of, especially of late, is that, you know, the rot over the last 10 years. But if we are honest with ourselves as a nation, this is not a last 10 years situation. I'm reminded of Travelgate. You remember Travelgate, where members of parliament were implicated. What happened there? What were the repercussions there? There was a scandal way back in the Department of Social Development where some of their employees, and I'm talking in the early 2000s here, I think, employees of the department were fraudulently taking monies. They had signed up, created ghost accounts, and were benefiting from that. What were the repercussions? They were literally let off with just a rack over the knuckles. So we seemingly do not have the will nor the appetite as a nation to really forcefully deal with these issues. What is your sentiment around that?
I couldn't agree with you more, Sakina. But when you say as a nation, who are we really talking about? Are we talking about the general public? Are we talking about public representatives? Are we talking about government as in, you know, those people who are now in power, who are elected once, you know, the voters have cast their votes? For me, we are talking about public accountability. And I think we need to make sure that as we are nearing an election, these are the things that South Africans should be asking themselves as to whether have I brought or ensured that my public representatives are brought to account for some of these things that I might not be happy about, including, you know, the slippery slope that we seem to be descending into. I couldn't agree with you more that in the past 10 years, maybe even, the past 2 decades, as this year we are going to be unpacking the gains as well as the limitations or the weaknesses of 25 years of freedom or independence after apartheid, that as we reflect on those years, we should also be aware about what our individual roles are in this whole scenario. Not just the politicians, but also citizens, voters, as it were. You and I, Sakina, should be asking ourselves, have we turned a blind eye? And what has been the implications of that turning of the blind eye? If we have been implicit, or at least we have somehow allowed whatever slippery slope we are facing now to go on, we should also be honest and say, actually, after the 2019 national and provincial elections, as South Africans, we should hold our political office bearers to account. But the same applies also to the private sector, because what Agrizzi was pointing to, in my view, is also the role of the private sector in the whole corruption issue, which we sometimes seem to overlook. It's not just corruption in government circles or in the public sector, but corruption also in the private sector.
And I think that is a very well-made point there. And going to the issue of public accountability, and if I could perhaps just also bring in the issue of the DA and its election billboard that was ripped up by alleged family members of those whose names were on it. When we talk about accountability and the agency of the electorate, because when there is no accountability from the public representatives, that happens with the tacit approval of us ordinary South Africans that are the electorate. As we saw yesterday with that DA poster, here you had family members who said, not in our name, you're not going to do this to us. So what is your take on that? And also the fact that the DA still hasn't backtracked or hasn't seen it from the perspective, the point of view of the family members or other South Africans who are outraged by it?
In my view, Sakina, this is possibly a typical case of nothing about us without us. You know the slogan that has been popularized by persons with disability, who say that people normally speak on their behalf without necessarily allowing them voice. In this case, we are talking about the victims of Marikana, the victims of the Life Esidimeni tragedy and the others. And I think they have a point, Sakina, because why would I want to have my relatives or even, my friends and so on, close members of the family, being, having their names reflected in a public billboard that is being used as a campaign tool for the 2019 provincial and national elections. So to that extent, the accountability of the party, in this case the DA, obviously it was supposed to be to the first to those victims, those people who have been affected by this, to say, how will they be able to accept us using their names? In fact, they should have asked for their permission first. And I think the message also goes to all the parties that as they plan their campaign materials, they plan more campaign billboards. We are going to have more of such billboards in the next 3 or 4 months, Sakina. That they should be warned, the parties, that they need to be sensitive to the needs of the public or whoever they are going to be mentioning those billboards. That's the first point. The second point for me is the code of conduct for political parties in the run-up to an election. As we speak, we haven't yet had proclamation of the election date by the president. Normally after proclamation, that's when we have this code of conduct being drummed up, as well as brought to the attention of the political parties to say, whenever you campaign, please make sure that you are sensitive to the needs of the voters. Do not promote violence, do not promote hate speech and so on. And please sign on the dotted line that you will also sensitize your supporters towards this code of conduct. And once they've signed it on the dotted line, we expect them also to work with the Electoral Commission of South Africa, as well as the National Party Political License Committees. These are the committees that regulate party political action during and after elections, to say that they need to respect the code of conduct. So in my view, this poster has come before that kind of signing of that code of conduct, and in my view, to some extent, it has potentials of violating that conduct, even though there's no specific violence, because it doesn't promote violence in my view. But the fact that people have reacted by removing the poster, it violates part of previous codes of conduct, whereby defacing a poster of a political party is an offense. Of course, I would understand that the sentiments and the feelings of the affected parties, the family members in this regard.
Well, Professor, thanks so much for speaking to us this morning. And from our Pretoria studios there, Professor Kealeboga Maphunye, Professor at UNISA in their Political Science Department. So talking about some of the stories that have made headlines this week. And as always, we always engage you. And at the question of the day again regarding Bosasa, what should happen with all of those contracts that government is currently entered into with Bosasa? We want to hear your views at Morning Live SABC. Right, with that, it's time for the latest